I would even go as far as saying when people make that argument, I'd say, you're right. I mean, let's get rid of those too.
I was just going to say, now having said that, I think they absolutely can aid and assist you in a hunt and make your success rate go up. And if we got rid of them, that'd be great. But
better.
I think drones are on a whole different level because you can take that thing in the sky and within seconds see every single deer on the property and know exactly what it's doing. You cannot do that with a cell camera or 10 cell cameras. All right, well, welcome to what I think is going to be our first official podcast, if that's what you want to call it. We're going to kind of work through some different things today, specifically around drones and their implementation around the sport of hunting. I can't remember what we wanted to talk about first, though. Last time, just give a little background to maybe what drove us to this point.
How we got to the table set up for the podcast instead of a tailgate.
Yeah. I was gonna say, at one point we had the tailgate talks. I don't know if I think we're leaving that entirely because we froze most of the time. We filmed it in a garage and it was not exactly real conducive for running higher tech,
no climate control at
microphones and cameras and such. So this is a little more controlled environment.
Yep. So we're going to use this to kind of get our opinions out there a little bit, and I think we should start off by saying that is all that this is for now. Just kind of our view, our opinion on this whole thing. Agree, disagree. I think what we've realized kind of talking about this over the last couple of weeks, especially, is that there's a lot of folks out there that feel the exact same way.
What I've noticed on the media or podcast specifically front, there's a lot of people talking about it. But a lot of the podcasts that I've seen so far have taken a pretty neutral, not neutral stance, but they're not really picking a side or another. They're just letting these people, say their piece. I think we're kind of picking a side a little bit more so than what I've seen in the past.
More so.
Yeah.
We'll get into that later.
We're just not afraid. We care so much about the sport and hunting, and
well, at the end of the day, you're not gonna know that there are problems, and if there are problems, you're not going to be able to address them successfully if you don't talk about them. So you got at a certain point, you have to just air out the dirty laundry and get the conversation started, because you're not going to go anywhere forward or backward if you don't say anything at all.
And we've started to be a little more vocal about this on social media, and what I've noticed is there is an overwhelming number of people that their opinions align directly with ours. People that otherwise probably wouldn't be vocal about those. And when we are starting to get that opinion out there, these people are kind of coming out of the woodworks and saying, yeah, I'm glad you guys are kind of, not that we have some huge platform, but essentially using what we do have to get these thoughts out there and start to bounce ideas around.
Well, and at the end of the day, too, if nobody listens to this except the three of us, at least the three of us are better educated because we know each other's opinions on the on the topic or whatever we're discussing at the end of the day, because this is hopefully going to evolve into a lot of different areas. So I mentioned this to Nick. I don't know if he mentioned it to you or not, but I wanted to kind of lay a bit of a foundation for, let's say, logical thought process and how you approach discussing things as a group so that you make sure that you're in line with good argumentation and debate strategies, tactics, ethics, things like that. So there's this little thing called fallacies that gets thrown around. I don't think a lot of people are super aware of exactly what it is. Logical fallacies is taught in classical Greek education all over the place. There's the appeal to authority, appeal to tradition. There's confirmation bias. There's all these different things that we tend to lean on in argumentation and debate to make us win that don't actually hold water in a real argument. One of them that comes to my mind immediately is confirmation bias. This is where, it worked for me, so it must work for everybody. Like, no, that just because that's your experience doesn't mean that's what's going to happen with everybody who has that encounter. So that's an example of a logical fallacy. So when we're having these discussions as a group, we want to keep that in mind, and we want to be able to educate you guys because it's not taught, I don't think, in schools as it should be. People don't know the background of how to do this properly so that you avoid biases and fallacies. So that's kind of where I wanted to just begin. And now I'll turn it over to you guys to introduce the topic.
I mean, if you are a hunter and have any form of social media, you've probably seen, I think it's been around the last 2 seasons, correct?
Yes. Yep.
Drones being used primarily for the recovery of deer after the shot. However, and we'll get into this a little bit later, they are starting to be used in different ways. Herd surveys, flying corn into properties, pulling deer out of properties. I think the sky is kind of the limit, no pun intended there. We have just looked at it from the standpoint of how those things, even if they are intended to be used for good, can and are being abused. So I guess we can kind of get into it from there. So drones, if you're not a hunter or you're listening and you're unsure of what we're talking about, large aircrafts being flown up into the sky with the use of thermal and 4K or maybe higher imagery to basically see everything on a property you want, every deer that exists on the property, find your deer that's injured, alive, dead, whatever, and you're probably starting to realize how that can be abused. So, Easton, why don't you take it away from there on kind of from the top?
I was going to say, I think to state at least my overarching opinion, I would say probably pretty closely in line with everybody else. Obviously, you want people to find their game. You've wounded an animal, a deer, and at that point, it's wounded. You want to find it. You want the meat to be utilized. You don't want it to go to waste. And that's where kind of the argument or the debate start. So if drones can be utilized strictly for that purpose, I think we all three can agree it's a great thing. It is a great thing. However, where we start to get into the issues is the different ways that it can be abused and then the implications that abuse has, which a lot of people are recognizing. Even the people that are on the more pro-drone side do recognize that there can be abuse. And the main argument that we've heard so far is, well, anything can be abused. Anything. Yep. You're correct. However, what I don't agree with is the fact that the level of abuse and the implications that come with the abuse of this technology are insanely large, right?
And they have
endless,
long-lasting ramifications
Correct.
that are, yes, that's true. At the end of the day, like you said, we are hunters, and the reason that we hunt is for trophies on the wall and meat in the freezer. And so recovering a deer, whatever you can do to be better at that would seem like on its face a good thing. We want to be better blood trailers. We want to be better shots. We want to be better woodsmen. If you have to track it with a dog, utilize a dog. It's fair game. It's legal. And if a drone is available and that's the only purpose it can serve, I don't know that there's any harm in that avenue.
I think there is. Because even someone like us that does everything by the book, we pass deer a minute before legal shooting light, we abide by the rules. You may take the drone up and follow everything to a T. However, while that drone's in the air, you're going to see every deer on that property and what it's doing. Mm-hmm. That's going to sit in the back of your mind, and that is going to aid you in the future. What are you going to do? Just say, well, I know deer bed here now, but I'm not going to take advantage of that.
Sure.
So I think it can absolutely be abused by the people that are intending to abuse it. But I think almost now, in an unintentional way, you can gain intel from that, even as a stand-up person, a good person that's going to influence you and benefit you in the future. Which is why I think some states like Michigan or whatever, they say that the drones are illegal because they aid in the hunt, and the tracking and recovering of a deer is still a part of the hunt, which is why I put an Instagram poll up a couple days ago about if people think that tracking or blood trailing or pursuing the deer after the shot is still a part of the hunt. 100% of people that messaged back said yes, it is still a part of the hunt, which is why it just confuses me that we're allowing this gray area to kind of take precedent over everything else, because everyone agrees that that's still part of the hunt, but yet we're using drones.
So what you're saying is, even within the bounds of legality right now, there are ways that you can use the technology within the law that are aiding in your hunt, essentially, that is not fair chase.
Can we do this for a minute?
100%.
What is the law? We are in Ohio. What is the law on drones in the state of Ohio, as you know it as of today?
Right now, it cannot be used, and this has been even before the recovery, the drones. So like just the drones that we use for wedding videography cannot be used to aid in your hunt. So I can't fly it over a field and call you and say, hey, Jake, there's a deer in the corner or whatever.
Same reason why you can't have walkie-talkies and you're not supposed to be able to talk back and forth.
Right. But that's the gray area, where what is still considered the hunt and what is aiding in it. If you have already put an arrow in the deer, are you aiding in the hunt, or are you just enhancing the ability to recover the animal? Because that's also in the law. You're supposed to do everything basically in your power. I'm obviously making words up.
The legislature's way of trying to cover all their bases.
Everything in your power to recover that animal. So it's kind of like, okay, does this, trump the aiding in the hunt, because we're doing everything in our power to recover the animal? Which just comes back to, in my opinion, even if you have 5 people that are abusing that, then that's just 5 too many. In my eyes, again, that's not necessarily the right way to look at it. But if us 3 are going to do it the right way, and 100 other people, that's great, cool, that's awesome.
Well, and that's true.
If 5 people aren't, that's a problem.
So I was trying to think about that because you've made that point to me in conversation before, and I'm sure Easton's heard that point also. So I was trying to think about that from a logical argumentation perspective. And what I would say is the same way that drinking and driving is illegal, even though it's a small minority of people who drink and drive and abuse that pairing, it's still illegal to do that. So on the other side of the coin, we've heard talk that, sure, 5 people are going to abuse it. You're going to make it illegal for the rest of us? It's like, yeah, that's exactly what we did with drinking and driving. It's exactly the same thing. So logically, that your argument holds water in this situation. So,
yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of situations when you could legally skirt the law in this situation. So, I mean, I'm all about fair chase. I choose to sometimes make things harder, my hunting harder, for the sake of giving myself enough of a challenge to where in my own, hunting endeavor, career, whatever you want to call it, I feel like I am chasing that deer and letting him, I need to beat him. I'm not using all these different things to get upper hand on him, I guess. So I'm thinking
like
of
1,000-pound corn piles.
1,000-pound corn piles, and yeah, I mean, crossbows. Which, I mean, again, recurve guys could say, you're using a bow with training wheels. I get it. But from the standpoint of taking that drone up, I'm before I ever go hunting, I'm at the truck. I take the drone up, and we have gotten to experience firsthand the level of detail that these things give you. And maybe we'll get into that later. But you take the drone up, you find your target buck. You know exactly what he's doing, whether he's bedded or he's with other deer, he's headed to feed, whatever. You know your wind direction. You found him. You've located him. You pull out your map. You figure out which way the wind's blowing, where that deer was headed, or if he was bedded somewhere, and you have him on a bed to feed pattern. Okay, so he's bedded up on this ridge. I now fly the drone back to myself, land it. I am now legally allowed to go hunt, and if I know he's going to from this bed to this cornfield in the evening time, I go set up between him and the cornfield. Am I in the same position in that case as I would be deciding I'm going to go hunt tonight, pulling out my phone, hopefully the deer's within 3 miles of me right now. I have a target buck, but I don't know where he's at, and saying, okay, based on this terrain feature, this saddle, whatever, this wind direction. I'm going to go hunt here. Am I in the same position and the same likelihood of finding or encountering or killing that deer as I would be in each scenario? Obviously not.
Nope.
And that to me is, I mean...
Situation A is within the bounds of the law currently in Ohio.
Yes.
Yep.
That's not aiding in the hunt?
Nope, because the drone's landed. It's no longer in the sky.
So that's a sticking point, right? The drone isn't in the air, so it's not aiding you in the hunt, even though it provided you with all the information you need in order to hunt, let's say.
Anytime somebody's brought that, or I've brought that example to somebody, a lot of the pushback I get is, well, cell cameras do the same thing. And I honestly couldn't disagree more.
Yeah.
Cell cameras miss, and both of your guys' hunts, just within the last 7 days, are testaments to this. Cell cameras miss so much.
Trail cameras in general.
You saw 20 deer, and there was, 3 on a camera, on a camera, and the buck that you ended up shooting, no picture, right. You hunted a deer that was not on camera at all, and you saw him 3 nights in a row.
Correct. All within, 20-acre piece, but all of this was happening within a 5-acre section of that piece where he's bedded, where I'm seeing him, and where my cell cams are.
Right.
However, I would even go as far as saying when people make that argument, I'd say, you're right. Let's get rid of those too.
I was just going to say, now having said that, I think they absolutely can aid and assist you in a hunt and make your success rate go up. And if we got rid of them, that'd be great.
All
but
better.
I think drones are on a whole different level because you can take that thing in the sky and within seconds see every single deer on the property and know exactly what it's doing. You cannot do that with a cell camera or 10 cell cameras.
So this is a classic example of what's called a false equivalency argumentative fallacy, which is comparing two things that are incomparable. It's the same situation that this is one of the things that it always drove me crazy when people made this argument. 3 years ago, almost 4, when the whole COVID thing was going on, and they were trying to enforce mandatory jabs. People would say, well, they can force you to wear a seatbelt. So, of course, they can force you to do this because it's all for public health and public safety. It's like seatbelts are not a needle in my muscle tissue. They are 2 incomparable things. You cannot compare them. It's a red herring argumentative fallacy. So, comparing cell cams and drones, not comparable at all. 2 totally different types of technology with 2 totally different, vastly different capabilities.
Yeah, I think it's important. And as I'm taking notes and stuff and trying to draw situations to compare and all these things, like I'm very careful to try to make things apples to apples, and I know that's not always exactly attainable. However, that's obviously our goal, is to keep things relevant and similar. However, I think that all goes back to the point I made earlier, is the implications that come with the abuse. I don't think the implications of a cell cam picking up a deer is resulting in the level of devastation that these drones are going to have and are already having, quite frankly, because, these drones are giving way too much information. There's so many different ways, and now we're learning that they can be abused, and we've all had experiences with those, and we'll probably get into that later, but definitely not comparable.
No. Something else that under that, I guess, same realm, somebody messaged us today and said, what do you guys think about if Ohio would implement you use a drone, they somehow have to submit it to the DNR, and you can't hunt your property for 48 hours. The only thing I think that's interesting about that is I wonder if that would just minimize the amount of people that call the drone. Let's say you took your rutcation and you have 3 days left and you shoot a deer in the guts, and it's like, maybe I'll call a dog instead of forfeiting my last 3 days. I don't know how you could possibly enforce that, which is the problem with most of this stuff. You get a lot of message about, we can have this regulation and that regulation. How do you possibly enforce it?
That's where it goes back to, if we're not willing to have our minds changed, I don't think we're putting up a good enough argument for where our opinions are right now. I'm willing to, if somebody comes to us and says, here's a plan that I think we could implement to use these drones and keep the abuse limited to virtually none, I would be the first to be like, you know what, that's great. However, everything that I've tried to come up with in my head of how we could, certify drone users or whatever. They have to be licensed through the DNR or something, and maybe do like a pre-drone recovery check-in where you have to check in with your game warden and say, hey, I'm going to this property to try to recover this deer. I mean, right now, our game wardens can't even answer the number of calls that they're getting as is, not trying to juggle managing all this nonsense.
Yeah.
And so that's where it's just like it becomes an administration issue. There's no way to stay on top of it for our DNR because they're already limited on what they can manage.
But is it, I don't know that it's an administrative issue. I think it's a cultural issue. Because just like, I mean, in mainstream federal, state, and local politics, the thought is that politics is downstream of culture, which means that the policies that get implemented by your government are because that's what your culture wants. So it seems to me like right now, the widespread use of drones for recovering deer is because the hunting culture wants that part of hunting to be easy. And so then the legislation is going to allow for the drones because that's what the culture wants. So it almost sounds to me like forget the administrative stuff. We've got to start. That's what this is all about. Essentially, podcasting and talking about these issues is a culture building exercise. We're trying to express our opinions because at the end of the day, we want a sound hunting culture that's based on traditional values, ethics, and morals that hunters and trappers who are of legendary status from 100 years ago would look at today and think, those guys are doing it right. And you got to start somewhere building that culture. The laws aren't going to force people to change their culture. That doesn't happen in any aspect of life. So
no, that what I found super cool is a lot of the people that have messaged us on social media, there's been multiple people who have, within just a few short messages back and forth, completely changed their opinion, which is sweet. At first they're like, I don't see why it's an issue. Don't you want people to recover deer? Yeah, we do. But here's our argument. And literally just a couple messages back and forth, and they're like, yeah, you know what? Never mind. Like, I see where the problems lie. And that's super cool. And I think a lot of the people that already agree with us right off the get-go are really serious hunters. I think the people that you're talking about, hunt, but they're not what I would consider to be a hunter.
Elmer Fudd's.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, people the easy crowd, they want hunting to be easy. They want to go out there and they want to find success, whatever that means. However, by whatever means they can find that success.
If you brought a drone to the market that shot the deer, they would take advantage of it. Those types of people.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And so what we're seeing is, people associate easy hunting with better hunting. That is good. And all these things, crossbows and bait and cell cams and drones, they all make it easy. So there's a large crowd that in their eyes, this is all good things. Like, why wouldn't we want this? Where I think in pulling some of this back, pulling some opportunity back, whether that's a individual crossbow season, no bait, no cell cams, no drones, we pull that back, that would result in better hunting, not more. We pull that back, and I think in a few short years, you would immediately see change in our deer herd in both quality and quantity would have an uptick, and then we could actually experience better hunting.
Isn't that like just so... I don't know.
Counterintuitive.
Yeah, it's
not
just
what
like
you would think.
When you say it like that, I don't know how anyone could possibly be like, no, you're
because
wrong.
People can't see long term.
Yeah.
This season, I need my buck.
Yep.
If it's the best buck out there, if it's a 150, 140, I'm going to get it by whatever means necessary. And the next year, hunting's getting worse. The deer herd quality is getting worse in both terms of quality and quantity. Maybe my best buck's a 120. I'm going to get it. And then I worry about the next year, and we're slowly seeing it drop. And I had a good conversation with my taxidermist yesterday in Southern Ohio, and he said the same exact thing. He said, in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was nothing to have 190s and 180s all over the place. Not behind every tree, but he said every year he had pictures of them. And then he said over time, you noticed, non-residents coming in and longer seasons and crossbow seasons. And, now we're seeing a transition between our gun hunters. Most of them are crossbow hunting now. It's more favorable weather. more comfortable to be out in. In my opinion, October is one of my favorite times to be out, better hunting. And he said now, I mean, you got 130s, 140 class deer, and those 180s and 190s are, I mean, virtually non-existent.
The guys that used to go out and would do their boots on the ground scouting and would spend the time, learn the terrain, learn the deer in their area, and would do it in order to shoot big bucks, now have competition from the guys who would go out there with their 12-gauge shotgun, throwing lead in every direction during the Orange Army season just to shoot a deer, because those guys now have tools at the ready that make them capable of doing the same thing that someone would have had to spend 80 hours doing before. Now they can do it with the cell phone. They can do it in their spare time when they're laying in bed, not paying attention to their kids or whatever, you know. There's all kinds of things like that. I told this story to you guys the one of the times that we've discussed this topic, but when I first met my wife and told her that I was a hunter, she was like, that was a major red flag for me, because she comes from a part of the state where the people who hunt are, I mean, they're just Elmer Fuds. That's what they are. They're beer cans thrown out the window, going out there half blitzed, shooting shotguns to kill whatever's running across brown it's down. And that's what she knew of, because that's all that there was in her area. I was like, no, we're way different than that. Like the hunting culture that we grew up in, that you grew up in, and that someday we're going to raise our kids in is totally different than that. But those guys now have tools that make them capable of doing exactly what we tried to do with hard work and sweat equity. Only they can do it with a couple $1,000s at a Cabela's and be ready to go.
I think what we're creating, though, is it's going to be hard to choose that style of hunting because there's such a high level of competition now. Yep. How can I compete? You know, I was raised, you know, I shoot a compound bow. I don't use cell cams. I mean, not me personally, but I'm saying theoretically, you know, I don't use any of those things. How do I compete in a world, a space where everybody else is?
Yeah. The reasons for why you would continue to do it that way are dwindling, because their buddies at school someday are going to be like, oh yeah, look at this 190-inch whitetail that I shot with my crossbow at 95 yards. Had him on the drone 3 hours before. That makes it real difficult to want to be out there.
Yeah, I mean, and the general hunting public will never police themselves. So it's going to take law change to force this upon people. People generally will do anything that is allowed to the extent of the law. No matter what the weapon is, if it's legal, and sometimes people stretch even that, they're going to take the opportunity. So we're never going to do it ourselves. I mean, people like us will.
You're saying the legality issue would speed up the process? Is that what you're saying? Whereas culture building might take 20 years for this stuff to change?
And I don't even know if people would ever accept a culture change. That's our problem, is people will do whatever they are allowed within the bounds of the law to do that increases their odds of success.
Just like how quickly straight wall cartridge rounds were adopted. Now everyone's shooting a 45-70 or a 350 Legend because it's legal in Ohio now.
Yes. So what I'm saying is it's going to take a law change to pull some of this opportunity back, to force people to do this.
Or the herd will just dwindle so much that hunting will be so uninteresting to the average Joe, and he'll just hang it up for a while, which very well could happen.
And I said that for a while, and I was talking to my taxidermist yesterday again, and he brought up Pennsylvania, and I had never considered that. Pennsylvania is, I believe, the most concentrated, what do you want to say?
They have like 1 point for hunters?
Yes.
Yeah, they have like 1.2 million hunters in the whole state.
And how many people say that Pennsylvania has incredible hunting? Nobody.
Not many.
Nobody.
But maybe, has it just always been that way?
Possibly.
Maybe
but
for somebody that knows Ohio and is used to killing 160s and now they can't even see 100-inch deer.
I think certainly there would be some level of people that would fall off. However, I used to have that same kind of theory or whatever. But then I started thinking about Pennsylvania. I'm like, yeah, they have terrible hunting, yet everybody still hunts. So would we now be dealing with a tiny, crappy herd, and say you have a 10% fall off of hunters that just lose interest because of that, and we're still just raping our deer herd?
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know. I guess we'll see when that happens. But I think we should get back on the drones themselves. What were you going to say, Jake?
I was going to say, essentially, how would drones affect? You kind of started talking about this, the way that the utilization and abuse of potential drone technologies causing the deer herd, which you harp on all the time as it's a limited resource. It's not infinite. We have to actively do things from a conservation perspective in order to maintain deer populations. So how are drones affecting our ability to do that?
Well, there's a lot of ways. Why don't we share our 2 experiences from the last week, and I think that'll lead us down that lane. So, there's been, if you're on any sort of Facebook page or whitetail group or whatever, you've probably heard of reports or maybe seen it yourself of how people are getting caught abusing this. But we've both had kind of a personal experience. I don't want to say that the situation I saw was being abused, just the opportunity and the potential that was right there in front of me was it was mind-boggling to me. So was hunting a property, a lot of people hunt the property, driving out that day, guy flying a drone, tracking a deer on the property. So I went over, I'd never seen it in action in person. So I went over, approached the gentleman, 2 really good guys. But you could see that, the technology is insane. This drone was probably like 100 feet above the trees. And you could see every single deer in the woodlot. We saw bucks fighting, bucks chasing, bedded bucks, big bucks, little bucks, does, the buck that was shot, the blood dripping off this deer. You could see it all. You name it, you could see it. I also hunt that property. It would have been nothing for me to take that intel, look at the wind direction, use the terrain, and not even like stalk the deer, but just set up in a spot. I'd like to think I know kind of how deer use terrain. Set up in a spot that would just drastically increase my odds. Now that's me. There's nothing to say those guys legally could land that drone and go pursue that deer, or the other guy could pursue another deer. That is legal. So that is happening. That's not just like, that is happening. There are reports of that. There are people that have been caught. There are stories all over the internet. That is happening. So that's one way that it can be abused, and it is being abused.
That's factual based on the laws that are in place right now. It could get really sticky if you fast forward to when maybe they navigate some of these laws, because I've heard some of the arguments people make is, well, why don't we just say, once you take that drone up, you can't hunt that property for 24 hours, 48 hours, whatever. You have now seen what's going on in that woodlot. Does that now put you in a moral dilemma because you have seen what's in that woodlot, and say the law is written to where you cannot go in there for 2 days? Sorry, you took your rutcation and you have the next 2 days of PTO. That's your only property to hunt. What do you do?
Well, at the end of the day, your point is, ain't nobody going to follow that law.
No.
Right?
Well, even if you do, how many people share hunting properties with their buddies? Hey, I can't hunt, but here's a little splice of information for you.
Yeah.
150-inch deer bedded on that ridge. Go get him. You didn't hear it from me.
And this week being gun season especially, I started to think about more of these scenarios. You fly it over a CRP field and you see your target deer bedded, and there's a tree line 100 yards from where he's bedded. You climb up in the backside of your tree, slip in there with your rifle, and wait for him to stand up in the evening time. You know he's going to stand.
Even beyond that, too, because you guys are both talking about instances where guys are trophy hunting. What about the guys that just deer drive and just want to kill stuff? You fly a drone up and you're like, okay, they're in this woodlot. You post here, you post here, you post here. You're darn near going to kill every deer in that woodlot.
Or use the drone to move those deer.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of leads into my personal experience, and this one's tough because I didn't see it firsthand. This was all kind of just going based on what I was listening to, because I was down in a bottom essentially. I was out this past week. It was Wednesday, I believe. Yes. And so I was hunting the property that I pretty much have to myself. There's one other guy that's in there occasionally. And this week is Ohio's gun season. So I was in there and was getting kind of sleepy, and up on the neighboring property, 3 shots rang out real close. Didn't think a whole lot of it, just assumed, somebody shot one. And probably within a minute or two of those shots ringing out, I hear something that to me sounds like a side-by-side kind of accelerating, essentially. And I didn't think of anything of that either. I just assumed those guys had a side-by-side. Well, after a minute, it sounded like a side-by-side moving extremely fast on a paved road. You could hear like wind. And at this point, still didn't really click with me. And then I'm thinking of where the nearest paved road would be. And I'm like, man, it's a long, long ways off. And at that point, the sound of it kind of changed, and I realized that's a drone. I mean, this thing was humming. And I got my phone out because I was going to film it, because I was just like, what is going on? And it got to a point where I thought for sure I would be able to see it over top of the tree line, even though I'm in a low spot. Listened to it for a few minutes. At one point, it sounded like it was coming over towards me, which I'm thinking through just different scenarios, and I kind of realized like how the invasion of privacy could come into play. I mean, it's gun week in our area. Most woodlots have a hunter in them. It just seemed odd because I was fully anticipating seeing this thing just fly right over top of me. And I think the law may state that you need to be within airspace technically, and there's a certain height maybe, or at least in some states, I think it's like 100 feet above the tree line or something. But even regardless, I mean, the level of detail that you're describing of this drone literally seeing blood drop off the side of a deer's side is just insane. So the idea of having it hovering over me and not really, it was a real strange feeling.
Get in there and count your eyelashes.
It was odd.
Not to mention, it's just like a invasion of privacy, yes, but also just like people go out to the woods to
to get away from that stuff,
decompress, to relax, to get their mind off things, and you have just drones ripping over your head.
It was odd because I mean, I was, like I said, I was fully anticipating seeing this thing, and just the idea of like looking up and being like, wanting to look down and kind of cover my face because it's like it's an invasion of privacy, absolutely. And then it opens a whole new door of like, could they be flying over my property to see what's on my property?
Or
could they be
scare
spooking?
away? Yep.
Yeah, do they come over here because they haven't seen their target buck?
Could they be flying it over to see if there's any humans there to know whether or not they can go and drive that property?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you throw the thermal feature on and say, okay, there's nobody in here, and I see this buck, and this pile of does. Let's hit it. Absolutely. So fast forward, things settle down, drone goes quiet, whatever. Probably 30 minutes goes by or whatever. Hear 2 more shots, bang, bang.
In the same spot?
Same exact spot. Within minutes, same noise. I hear it again. This time I know. So sure enough, I listen to it. Probably 10 minutes. It flies around, maybe 5 minutes. Lands eventually. And it happens a third time before I ended up spooking a buck that night because my wind was dropping and thermals were pulling it the opposite direction that I anticipated it to be. So I bailed, but 3 different times I heard this thing, and I'm trying to picture what's happening in my head. And I know I talked to you after the hunt, and we were talking like, could they be shooting deer? And then immediately they took this drone out into the field with them that they're hunting out in the field. And when they shoot the deer, are they taking it up and watching where the rest of the herd's running? Are they following and trying to relocate them so a driver can, get around them and push them back out to their standers? I mean, there's 100 different ways you can kind of interpret it, what I was hearing, but it was really odd.
And just to think, and I know this isn't necessarily an aspect that is affecting the population, but just I get real hung up on the woodsmanship aspect of that. That is not hunting.
But is that affecting the population? Is it natural to push? Say they're watching the rest of a group of does run into the next wood block, and they fly that drone over there. We in the off season, just while gathering footage for, films or whatever, have seen deer in fields with our drone. I know at one point we were planning a food plot and we had it up filming the food plot, and there were some deer out in the field. Those things took off when they heard that drone.
You could definitely drive them with the drone.
Correct. So are they intentionally spooking deer back out to their area? Are they just following and watching the deer? That way they can have some guy loop around and just push them back out to their standers?
Probably all of the above.
So wouldn't that affect the number of deer?
Yeah. No,
Because
I was just
more-
saying the aspect of like seeing where they run or whatever. I get real hung up on like the blood trailing and the tracking of the deer is like my favorite part. Like having to know, okay, here's where I hit the deer, and here's a landmark in the woods of like, okay, he was by that tree, and okay, now I see this blood, so I know it was maybe a liver shot because of the color, and here's the way he acted, and his tail was wagging, and his back was arched, and now I got to go in there and go slow and figure out where he's at. Where now you're just taking a drone up and seeing where it ran. So like that aspect alone is what I was saying, is like I don't know if like tracking them with the drone is necessarily what is affecting the population itself. The abuse that comes with it absolutely is, or driving them absolutely is. But that I get so hung up on that because how is that fun?
Well, even beside that, like you mentioned that this drone could be driving the deer. Maybe they're just flying the drone up in between to see where the deer falls. Maybe they're doing it to, okay, I shot a deer, it ran off, now I need to know where it is. I can mark a pin, then I know where to go and recover that deer. But right here, I mean, this is a beautiful thing. The DNR of Ohio has an app. This is where I keep track of all my tags. This is where I check my game in, and it has the regs. And right here, a deer hunter may take more than one deer per day as long as the harvested animal's information has been recorded on the permit or submitted to Game Check. That would mean you'd have to go after and physically put your hands on and recover that animal, unless you have a drone that can go out there and tell you what it is, zoom in far enough to count the points, and then you can check in that animal without having to go recover it, and you can sit in that stand and you can shoot multiple
Is this
deer.
even natural at this point? Like, it's robotic. I mean, you don't even have to leave the truck if we want to take it real far. I mean, just a few more rules that we can kind of find loopholes in. Take the drone up, shoot the deer with the drone, and then we're already using them to recover deer from the field.
What do you mean shoot the deer with the drone?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that'd probably be the next thing.
Oh,
I mean,
like,
just
no, it legitimately could. And for people to think that it may not be are ludicrous.
The military has them. They do it overseas from thousands and thousands of miles away. And there's no reason to think that it's not possible to do
and
here.
People can say, well, you're just, you're stretching things way too far. Dude, 25 years ago, if you would have said that there's a little box that you strap to a tree, and we have these little cellular devices that we carry around and we put them in our pockets, and that device that's strapped to the tree will take a picture of anything that's in it, and it wirelessly transmits it to your cellular device, and you can see what's there. And now we even have live. You can just go live on your camera. You would have said you're insane.
Yeah.
Bingo.
So no, I mean, it's really not. It's not out of the realm of possibility. We're already using them to recover deer from the field. Literally strap up to the deer and fly it up in the air and haul it to your truck. So we could ideally within a few years get to the point where we just don't even leave the truck. We may not even have to go out of the house.
Can kill them on the couch.
Exactly. Yeah, we've been saying we can't for years. So I mean, it's really not a stretch.
That is like one of my favorite parts. When somebody calls me and is like, I shot a deer, I'm like, oh my God, I cannot wait to blood trail. That is so fun.
Because it's part of the hunt.
It's part of the hunt. And you learn so much.
Yeah,
you
you
learn
do.
so much from a blood trail. I mean, oh my gosh. And just
that directly ties back to, if we don't want to call the recovery the hunt, the information that you learn from the recovery impacts your next hunt. Because what do we learn while we're on blood trails? We learn to identify where we hit it, how far it goes. I mean, essentially the lethality, if that's a word.
Yeah.
How lethal the shot was based on where you hit it. So we can
But
say,
you also learn while you're tracking that deer where other deer might bed. You might find new scrape lines and rub lines. You might...
kind of gives you a reason to intrude.
Yeah.
sure, but my point being, I mean, by studying that blood trail, it makes you a better hunter on the actual, if we want to call it the hunt side, where you're physically pursuing game. It can make you be more effective and put better shots on deer.
At the end of the day, the definition of, because that's what it's going to come down to, at least from that perspective of the argument, it's going to come down to, how do you define hunt? Is the word hunt in legislation simply the act of pulling a trigger and releasing a projectile one way or another? Or does it include recovering a dead animal?
It comes down to people's interpretation, which is one of the articles I read said the use of drones to recover deer basically just boils down to an individual's interpretation of the law right now.
Because there is no legal definition of those words.
Not really. Not right now.
And you said 100% of people on the poll said that the
100%. Yep. It wasn't even a
recovery
poll.
is
I just
part of
put
the hunt.
message us what your thoughts are if you think the hunt stops at the shot or if it continues to the track. And we had a lot of messages roll in, and every single person said that. And I think some people were taken aback when I went in and said, okay, well then what are your stance on drones? Because some people said, I'm for it, and then I gave my stance on it, and they were like, oh,
Exactly.
I didn't think of that.
Because when you say, does the hunt stop at the shot or is it part of it? People say, well, absolutely, it's part of it, without even thinking that right now you say, well, then you must be against drones. Well, no. Well, according to the law, you should be, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm going to quote Caleb Presley here, Easton, and Jake, and ask you a question. What do you say to people that say, don't worry about what other people are doing, just hunt the way you hunt, and if you don't want to use a drone, don't use a drone. Don't worry about what other people are doing.
This goes back to the implications that it has. I mean, anything can be abused. Anything within hunting can be abused. However, not all of the abuse in other scenarios affects the greater scale. I mean, this isn't a local scale that we're looking at. So the abuse of drones will affect me. It will affect you guys. It will affect anybody listening to this podcast. So that's why I concern myself with it. Even if I choose to not use a drone myself, I'm going to concern myself with it because it affects me and it affects everybody else. And the funny thing is, I am essentially fighting for better hunting for the guys who are pro-drone. I want them to have a better hunt in the future. And by me taking my stance on it, I'm essentially trying to better hunting for them, and they don't even appreciate it or realize it.
That's because they're living in the moment. That's what
Exactly.
the drone makes it easy right now. I don't have to worry about shooting a 180 in 5 years because I want to find this deer now. And I don't want to waste my time blood trailing a deer and worrying about all that other stuff. I just want it to be easy.
Shouldn't we do everything in our power to recover the deer, though?
Yes.
I don't like that argument
I
at
don't
all.
either, because there are, I think a lot of people that are pro-drone don't take the time to understand whitetail biology or pay attention after the hit or maybe go to a dog first. We just used a dog a couple days ago, and he kind of said he has found deer after drones. Am I not mistaken, Easton?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So a good dog's going to find the deer if it's dead. It's going to find the deer if it's dead. And people have argued, well, how are you pro-dog, but you're not pro-drone? They're both doing the same thing. Disagree.
That's a false equivalency argument.
Disagree. A dog, if anything, is what's the word I'm looking for? You're intruding with the dog. If anything, it's going to make your hunting harder in the future because you're taking a dog in there, you're taking another person in there, you're tramping around, you're stinking up the trail, whatever. Dogs and deer do not get along. So they're right. Number one is a good point. Number two, you can't see anything with a dog. With a drone, I can see every single deer on the property. A dog is not helping me locate or find or kill any other deer whatsoever. If anything, it is spooking and scaring and making that hunt in the future harder. So to compare the two, call it what you want to call it. You can't.
The dog hunt, or the dog helps entirely on the back end. A dog cannot be used to help you on the front side of the hunt. It's all the hunt, in my opinion, but the dog can only help with the recovery side of that. None of the information you're gaining is helping you on that a future hunt, I guess is what I'm saying.
I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he was basically saying, like, if people would just call a dog first or take the time that they know they need to take. He said what's happening is people are gut shooting deer, calling a drone instantly. They're taking the drone up and saying, there's your buck, he's still alive. They leave.
Give me $400 first.
Give me a pile of cash. They go in there the next morning. The deer's not in the bed anymore, and they call the drone again to come out there, or they call a dog this time. Whereas if you just would have said, okay, I know I gut shot him. I know what that means. I'll be patient as a hunter. That's do what I'm supposed to do.
The woodsmanship side of things.
Yep. Back out, go home, sleep that night, or don't sleep that night. Come back in the next morning. You'll probably find the deer on your own, and if you don't, you call a dog, and he will absolutely find that deer. You don't even need a drone.
Because a woodsman would realize that more than likely a gut shot deer is going to move from that first bed. Instead, we've just created this, don't worry about any of that. You don't even need that knowledge now. So you just call the drone the first night. There he is. Okay, go back in 12 hours and recover your deer. Well, he moved. You would have known that if you would have actually decided to pay attention and study and learn these things. And in our case, yeah, we just went through this. I mean, we backed out that night, gave it overnight, went back in, confirmed what we probably already knew, checked the arrow, okay, gut shot, called the dog, went in and found it right away.
Even in my case, I had shot the deer with a shotgun at like 50 or 60 yards and quartering away.
Your recovery was a prime opportunity to call a drone. I mean, prime.
It would have been, sure. I don't know. I mean, the thermal imaging would make a big difference because it's essentially a pine grove. So there's
Stop. Don't.
There's no way that you can
grove.
see through the canopy in certain spots on this property. But I wasn't absolutely sure about it. There's no arrow to go and recover to examine blood or stomach matter or whatever. I was relatively confident in what I saw, which was I had the crosshairs settled perfectly where I thought that the shot should be. I knew in my head I didn't take the time to stop the deer. So as I'm pulling the trigger, the deer is continuing to walk, which in your instance a couple years ago means the shot trails further back than where you were aiming. I thought I saw a mule kick, and I decided,
and you watched him intently until you couldn't any longer.
Watched him as long as I possibly could, and I, in my saddle, swung all over this tree trying to get a better view of that buck to figure out what's going on. Realized where he was standing, how long he stood there for, where he walked after he decided not to stand there any longer. His tail was wagging. So I have all of this information accumulated in my head. I found landmarks, so I knew in the future where he was at when I shot, where he was when he was standing, where he walked over the ridge that I couldn't see him anymore. All of that information, you don't have to know enough to pay attention to if you're just going to call a drone. And so we backed out. I didn't even go and check for first blood. The next morning we go in there, we find a blood trail, a relatively good blood trail, end up finding 4 different beds from a deer that hadn't been pushed at all until we eventually found the buck.
And he was right there 15 yards from those other beds, 20 yards from those other beds.
Only 60 yards from the shot.
If you take the right actions post-shot, you don't need a drone.
I just made the note. So essentially what we've done is we have allowed hunters to completely neglect the obligation to be diligent in their procedures post-shot. Don't even worry about it.
Or pre-shot with practice.
Or pre-shot, absolutely. Yeah, we kind of have a put a hole in it mentality, but we've allowed people to neglect their obligations, and then we're therefore supposed to buy into the, aren't we supposed to do everything to recover our game mentality? We're just supposed to, well, yeah, I guess so.
Yes, you are supposed to do everything in your power, which includes all of the preparation in order to begin the blood trail, as well as the preparation before you ever even set foot in the woods with your boots on. So.
Yeah, and if it all just comes down to recovering game and killing it efficiently, then let's just legalize any weapon we can. Let's just legalize them all if that's really what it boils down to. Yep. It doesn't. It doesn't just boil down to that. We have an obligation to be diligent woodsmen.
Yeah.
Yep. Man.
So one of the other things that you had mentioned about this tracker that we interacted with, you guys interacted with for your buck, was that the thing that's different about a dog versus a drone is that like you said, the dog will find it if it's dead, and the drone
it's a good dog.
Drone will find it dead or alive, and then take your cash and leave you there. And so then there's probably a lot of people out there who are just getting flat bamboozled by people who have drones. who are like, you gut shot the deer? Yeah, I'll come find it for you. And I know you're going to call me back 10 hours later when the buck's not in that bed because a coyote's going to run it off or he's going to get up and he moves 20 yards and you don't know where to go. So there's probably, I mean, it's being abused. The technology is being abused by hunters. Hunters are probably being abused by guys who have drones that just want to make cash.
It very well could be, but I don't know that for fact, but it very well could be. Yeah, I don't know.
I think something important to kind of look at is as we go down this rabbit hole, states are trying to figure out how to navigate it. We have people working with legislators to figure out what these laws should look like, because right now there's a lot of gray area, and frankly, my solution would be that the DNR should write their rules and regs to where they list what is legal, and anything that is not listed is not legal. That way you're constantly ahead of the game, because right now what we're doing is we're constantly chasing our tail because they're trying to find laws and regulations to keep up with this ever-changing technology. They cannot keep up with it. They were behind the ball on cell cams. They're still probably trying to figure that out. I know a lot of states are starting to make moves on that, and now we're behind on drones. So in the meantime, all these different abuses, which legally right now aren't even, a problem, are taking place because the law hasn't caught up to them.
The problem with that is legislatures don't write laws to determine what is legal. They write laws to determine what is illegal explicitly. That's their job.
I know, I don't want to say I know. I believe in Pennsylvania right now, they list things that are legal, and there's some conflict there with cell cams, I believe.
There's conflicts with the drone too, isn't there?
And yes. And I don't remember exactly how that's written.
I can't remember his story, but there is some, like most of this, there's some gray area. I know there's a couple states, I think I have it in here, where they're illegal because animals perceive the drone as a predator or other threat and react accordingly. So they're illegal because they feel as though that could be detrimental to the wildlife. You had kind of brought up like migration and stuff like that.
Yeah.
These are Western states, I believe, but that's an interesting take too, and kind of the aspect of like driving deer. Like to them, that's like obviously unnatural, and so that's one of the reasons why they're banned or illegal or whatever there. So
yeah, so if other states are recognizing it as having an impact on how a deer, elk, moose, whatever, interacts with it, and they're saying they can be used to spook these game.
Yep.
We should, that's obviously going to correlate with how they're used here. People can just use them to spook animals around and use them for drives, etc.
One of the things that I just keep, this has constantly been in the back of my head the whole time we're doing this, and I think about the trackers that we've interacted with before, or the trackers that we've heard talk about their dogs online, and like, man, that is such an art form. You have to be dedicated to that dog in order to get that dog to trust you enough to do a good job on a trail. You don't have to have any commitment like that from a drone. You go out and get a drone, anyone can go buy. This is just like the situation you talked about. If those guys had the drone with them close enough that they could fly it within minutes of shooting a deer, short of having the guy already paid and waiting at the truck, they would have to have it with them in the field. And that means those guys probably just forked over the cash and bought the technology so they could have it for their own personal uses. And you don't have that with a tracking dog. That's not an option, because it's not like you go and buy a tracking dog. Even if it's already trained, it's not going to do what you tell it to until it trusts you enough to do that job. And so that's a huge difference. Where the dog is an art, the drone becomes industrialized, and it takes the humanity out of all of this stuff. It makes it robotic, like you said. It's all
robotic. Absolutely. Yeah, I think I was trying to think of how the Pennsylvania deal was written, and I think what it is it's not stated as being legal. So essentially, if somebody wants to use a drone, they can say, well, that's not listed as being legal, therefore you're outside of the bounds of the law. and I don't know if that sounds familiar to you or if that sounds correct, but even trying to predict how Ohio specifically might navigate it, I think it's potentially likely that they would say that if you find that deer alive, you can no longer pursue it. That's just my take on it. There's a million different ways that it could go, but I think to keep people from using it to pursue live game, they would just say, if you fly the drone to find a wounded deer, if it's alive, you can't do it.
And then you run into the issue of the ethics that we talked about.
Correct.
People are going to say, well, is that the ethical thing to do? So they may override that law to put their mind at peace of like, okay, well, I went in there and finished him off.
You mean that break the law?
Break the law.
Override it?
Well, yeah, sure.
You are overwritten.
Bypass. Which is why I always just come back to you just got to get rid of them completely.
Yeah.
Because no matter how you draw it, no matter how you circle around and do this, do that, do the other, it's just like you just have to get rid of them.
Because it would put someone even like me, like you said, we pass deer literally single minutes before legal shooting light, even though we can see our pins and we can see the deer because we know it's not right. It's just our morals and our ethics helping us navigate our day-to-day lives. That would put someone like me in a weird spot where I can see a deer, he's immobilized, he's going to die, he's suffering, but he's alive. And now I'm not allowed to go after him. I don't know what I'd do. And I've already seen people on Facebook say, well, I'm doing it no matter what.
It's just like the tracking a deer at night and you walk up on him and you see him still alive. I know people that kill that deer and you can't, technically. In Ohio, you cannot do that. Yeah.
And that comes back to like if people are, and they are right now, willing to commit like egregious crimes. I mean, road hunting and all these other things. What makes us think that, there's morally sound people that are going to struggle with this, let alone all these. It's going to create so many issues that, again, it goes back to just, I think we're better off entirely without them.
I think so many people forget that with not just drones, but maybe cell cams, maybe other things, like we've gone since the beginning of time without these things. Like we don't need them.
That's true.
We have gone forever without them. We're fine.
That is an appeal to tradition argument, though. So that's an argumentative fallacy. The difference here...
Jake's always got this wisdom that I don't
the
understand.
difference here specifically is that... and this is a huge point, I think, to make, because what we had heard from some guys on the internet who do drone recovery for deer... is that their success rate is through the roof. It's like guaranteed we'll find your deer. It's like define find for me. Because like the tracker that you guys used said, yeah, the drone will find your deer, but that doesn't mean you're going to recover it because it might still be alive and it might move beds before you get to recover that deer. So yeah, the drone can find my deer because it has thermal imaging, can find every deer.
It can find it for the next 2 weeks.
Doesn't mean it's going to find it for me, dead right now, like a dog will do, guaranteed if it's a good dog and that deer is actually fatally hit and dead. That's what a dog will do.
It'll find it if it's alive too,
but a drone won't do that. But they're marketing it like it's guaranteed, it's a done deal. The drone is way better than the dog because we'll find it every time. That doesn't mean you get to bring that trophy home or that meat home. That's ridiculous.
And if the law is written the way I just described, with the drone side of what you just said, the scenario you just gave, you can't pursue it. If you just did your due diligence and tracked it, either by yourself or with a dog, and you come up on it, you can now shoot it as long as it's daylight. Correct?
I don't believe so.
With a dog?
You cannot use a dog to... I just had this up.
In Ohio specifically, you're saying, right?
It's kind of a gray area too, to be completely honest with you. You can't use them to hunt or push deer. So I don't know how that is with tracking. You can't use them to hunt or to push game. So I don't know. Yeah.
So at least in the scenario of if you just tracked it yourself and you come up on it, you can now kill it, finish the job. So essentially, does that is the drone more ethical? Because you have to leave it in one scenario and you could have killed it in another. I think the ethical thing would be to finish the job.
Well, absolutely. As a hunter, you want to recover your deer. You want to, if you're meat hunting or trophy hunting, that's what you want to do. So for all these guys that say, don't you want to recover your deer? It's like, yeah, they might write laws that drones won't allow you to do that. And plus,
They
you don't
have
need
there's
the
a
drone.
state that has happened in. It's in Missouri.
It might be.
There's a video out there of a drone guy that says it's almost like a spiff or a spoof. Like, I found him, but you can't go get him.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, going back to what did you call it? The tradition
Appeal
fallacy?
to tradition fallacy. Yeah.
I'm learning a lot here.
Fiduciary.
Going back to that, yeah, there's been a lot of people that are like, well, we've made the point of I just want to get back to, kind of the way we were, even just 10, 15 years ago would be nice. People are like, well, we can't expect, the counter argument, I guess, would be, we can't expect to be like the days of Fred Bear. Things have changed, obviously. And I acknowledge that. And frankly, I don't think there's a single person within the deer woods that isn't taking advantage of some of the advancements in technology, whether that be an implement, a phone app, a cell cam, since the days of Fred Bear. And I think for the most part, many of those things have been good things to come to the scene. However, at some point, we have to recognize where we draw the line and at what point we are devastating the quality of our herd. And that's where it comes into play is, I'm not denying that I utilize some of those things. I'm not saying we have to wear flannels and hunt with recurve bows.
It would be stupid not to.
Correct. And that's what these people are saying is, we all do it. However, if we cannot recognize that a line has to be drawn somewhere at the point that we are tipping and trending in a downward slide, I mean, I think we all need to acknowledge that.
The reason an appeal to tradition fallacy is a terrible argument to make is because if you say, why can't we just do things the way that it was? How far back? Do you want to go back and hunt with atlatls?
It'd be
Slingshots? Because that's why an appeal to tradition argument doesn't work in logical argumentation and debate. So if you're making on the flip side of that, there is a fallacy for a basically appeal to progress. Well, the drone technology exists. Why can't we use it? It's like that's not a good argument either, because you're not giving me reasons. All you're doing is trying to build yourself a pedestal to stand on, so that the person you're arguing against can't say anything to refute you. That's not a good way to have an argument.
I mean, what do you think the FOC was on the David and Goliath versus type of deal, like that slingshot?
Bro, it says a pebble, man. It says a pebble.
I mean, they were doing it back then. Can you imagine just dropping a booner with a pebble? That'd be sick. That'd be sweet. Yeah. A little humor to.
Now we'll take a break to hear from our fine sponsors. Do you have a cricket button on that thing? The only other thing that I wanted to hit on, and I have been tossing this back and forth in my mind if I even ever wanted to bring it up, but these suckers are so near and dear to my heart that I'm going to.
And this has changed a lot of people's minds.
I was just going to say, there are some diehards out there that I've brought this up to that are like, whoa, I didn't even think of that, is the dang wild turkey. We already know that the wild turkey has been through the ringer the last
2 decades.
Yeah, roughly. I mean, populations have dwindled drastically across a lot of the landscape. There's a lot of uncertainty as to why. There's a lot of speculation as to why. It's rough out there. There's been some rules and reg changes to try to help those things in some states, others not. But these drone guys all, went out there and bought these really expensive drones. Deer season's going to end. They're going to be like, well, I turkey hunt a little bit. How about I start, going up and finding these turkeys in their roosting trees, or I can maybe start telling my buddies and I'll go out to their properties and find exactly what tree these turkeys are roosted in. I mean, at what point do we let these things win? Like, holy cow. And that is going, I'm sure that already is happening. I've heard of guys doing it with their coyote scopes and stuff. I think maybe we were talking about that.
I had a particular scenario where someone told me that they were using a handheld thermal to go out before the trees greened up, essentially in the springtime, but season was open, and they're using these handheld thermals to locate turkeys, and they just knew exactly where to set up in the morning.
Where's the fair chase in that? And how detrimental is that going to be? They're already not that hard to kill in certain areas if you know what you're doing. In these small wood blocks that we have around here, there's one turkey roosted in it. You got a couple of your buddies. The odds are already stacked against the poor thing. And now you're going to use a drone and it is in the white oak that's 10 yards off the field edge. Like, come on.
And maybe there is a law that's already addressed, the handheld thermal deal that I brought up.
I just think, once again, even if there's a law, if you have all of this big influx of guys that have bought these drones, how are you going to catch that? How are you possibly going to catch that person?
The law is only as good as the administration that's going to enforce it. And that's where you're going to run into issues with all these things, because in our state, there's one DNR agent for an entire county. And that just is absurd.
And there's some counties that have zero. Or at least the last
'cause they
time
share
I
them.
looked at the county maps, there were some counties that didn't have a single game warden.
To me, unless you share a property with somebody, or you're like a neighbor and you physically see it happening, how would anybody ever get caught?
You wouldn't.
Right, and that goes back to the law constantly going to be trying to play catch up with this stuff. Oh, by the way, you can't use them to locate turkeys the night before with your thermal imaging.
After 300 people have already done it.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, you can't use it to fly 100 pounds of corn into your deer spot, which gives you the advantage of never having to step foot, put your scent, potentially bump on your way in or on your way out.
Is that happening?
It is. Yeah. Can you believe that? Yeah. You can now fly up to some of these drones have the capability of carrying over 100 pounds, and you can fly corn into a spot. At what point is the law able to keep up with this stuff? It's ridiculous.
I'm just thinking, how I feel like I would just be embarrassed as a man if I did that. I don't think I could look my spouse or significant other in the eyes.
But there's a lot of people doing things right now that I would be embarrassed to be doing, but it's things that people see as just a good opportunity to get a leg up on deer.
Convenient.
It's convenient, it's easy, and at the end of the day, you just want to put the deer on the ground, and hopefully it's a big one. You slap it on the wall, and you can brag about it.
Yeah. You could talk about the inches and tell the story about how, I didn't even go into the woods until I shot the thing. Or I was using my cell phone as a remote and shot it from the couch.
There's no sense of pride in challenging yourself anymore. So I killed a deer this weekend, and
with his bow during gun season.
Yeah, essentially, and I've had people look at me like I'm crazy. Some guy actually said, keep hunting them with the bow during gun season and let me know how that turns out for you. Well, it turned out pretty well, and it may have not have. Just as easily, I could have not shot a deer. But it's just weird to think that people don't want to challenge themselves. Because to me, it's a thing of art to go out there and make it difficult on yourself. And the deer are going to make it difficult on you, but I just cannot imagine taking advantage of every single thing.
But at the same time, and this is true for all of us, because I think we've all carried our bow during gun season at one point or another, and we've all killed deer with guns. So we're not bashing guns and gun hunting here, because they all have their place. The point is that the advantages that drones give you they far outweigh and multiply whatever advantages modern technology has already provided to a hunter.
Yeah, and I think that it goes back to the point of people will always do whatever
is easy.
Easy. Whatever is easy, and whatever to whatever extent the law allows them. And it kind of creates some concern with me, because I think at the end of the day, the law, which is written and endorsed by the DNR, they want deer dead. And so a lot of these things aren't going away, in my opinion, unless the people really band together and you do get a group of people who take a stand against it and say, essentially, no, we don't want this for the state of Ohio, or, frankly, anywhere.
We've heard it for a number of years. Ever since we were little kids, this is what the adult hunters in our lives have told us, which is that the state of Ohio determines how many deer tags an individual can get based on what the insurance companies want to see from reduced car accidents because of deer. Well, that's who you're up against in terms of legalizing this sort of thing is essentially big insurance companies who are lobbying for state governments to pass laws that will drastically reduce the number of deer so that there are fewer accidents caused by deer, so they don't have to pay for accidents like that.
And how do you compete with that?
Well, it's very difficult. Unless you have a whole group of people that are on the same page with you. At the end of the day, there is something to be said for a large group of people with a cultural shift who are willing to pursue communication with their local reps or local government or DNR officer or whatever. That's how you can make small changes with grassroots efforts.
And these insurance companies are completely disconcerted with the quality of the deer herd. They look at strictly numbers.
Yep.
And the resource itself of our deer herd, in my opinion, I see it in two different ways. I see the quality and the quantity. They're strictly looking at it from a quantity standpoint. So, as long as the state's killing this many deer, they're happy. As long as they have, this many accidents or less, they're happy. So as long as they're achieving that goal, they're thrilled. Where we could be taking a huge hit in quality.
Yeah.
And that's essentially irrelevant to them.
Yeah. Yeah, your age, I can totally see. I had some thought about whether or not someone would utilize this drone technology to recover does if they were meat hunting and shot a doe. Would someone, you're getting ready to say something, so what's up? Would someone use a drone to recover a doe?
I listened to one gentleman that uses a drone service a lot, or has a drone service, and he said he's had one call.
One call?
One doe call.
How many calls for bucks?
I don't know that exact
All
number,
but one?
but I'm going to tell you it's a lot.
What's that doing for the age class of the bucks in the area that you
That
hunt?
also makes me question if we should do everything to recover the animal.
Yes.
Well, then how come
To recover the
you're
antlers.
only getting the bucks?
Because
To
you
recover
don't
the
care.
antlers.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
don't
you don't
care
actually
about
care.
the meat. You don't care about recovering the deer. You want to recover the buck.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so your argument falls apart right there because you've had one call for a doe.
I'm not spending $400 on a doe. Well, then
Bingo.
you don't actually care.
Exactly.
And at that point, like my side of the argument would be from the point of view that the does are the factory that make more deer. I would almost say that you have a larger obligation to recover the does that you shoot so that you can tag them and check them in to know exactly how many you've killed. I was listening to a guy, I had the business relationship with him several years ago, so I kind of know where he's coming from for this.
And it was business.
It was all
strictly
business.
Okay.
Great guy, very knowledgeable deer hunter, knows tons of biologists, so he's been involved in tons of research in this space.
He's
And
a very well-known figure.
He is a very well-known figure. I'm not going to say his name, but I got to hunt with him a couple times. His argument was about deer numbers and deer populations and the quality of the hunting experience moving forward, unrelated to drones. He was simply talking about how a state should manage its deer herd in terms of how many tags it issues for each hunter. 2 points that I thought he made that were extremely insightful that I think are relevant to this because they're contextual is that nobody should ever say that a state like Pennsylvania should implement the same laws as Iowa so that Pennsylvania has a deer herd like Iowa's. Because guess what? Iowa has such a small population of humans. They have 250,000 hunters statewide. Pennsylvania has 1.2 million. Just because of sheer density of hunters, that doesn't make any sense in terms of how the state issues tags. Set that one aside. The second point he made was, if you're a hunter and you're out there for meat, don't shoot adult does. Don't. They're your factory. Shooting fawns should be part of your deer herd management practice. Shooting young bucks should be part of your deer herd management practice. And the reason for that is not because young bucks grow up to be big bucks, but because if you shoot adult does, you've shot your factory. It's like shipping your factory overseas. Now you don't get those deer. Those young bucks are going to leave to find more does somewhere else. You shoot a young buck, you might not shoot an adult doe that's going to have two fawns that might be two young bucks next year. So you took out one, replaced it with two. You shoot an adult doe, you might shoot the adult doe and remove her possibility of having twin fawns the following year. Now, you killed one deer, but reduced next year's deer herd by 3. from a population standpoint, that makes a lot of sense. And so if there are guys out there who are shooting does and not using the drone to recover their deer, they're doing the population a greater disservice than if they're all out there shooting all the 180s. That's going to ruin your age class of bucks. But if you've got guys out there that are their early season, they've got the drone, like you said, they know the bed to feed pattern, and they go out there and they shoot their deer early, and then in Ohio they go out and they fill their other 5 doe tags. Imagine, or they attempt to and they wound 2 and don't use the drone service to go and get it. Maybe they killed 7 and they only recovered 5. Now imagine what that's going to do to your deer herd in the next 5 years. It's going to decimate it.
Yeah, and I know there is an argument out there, and I can see it. Are less deer now being killed overall? Because if we have a higher successful recovery rate, there's less people not recovering their deer, going back out and shooting another deer. So I could see where there's potential. I don't know whether I buy into it or not, that less deer overall are being killed because we're recovering the first deer instead of not recovering it. It is in fact dead, and then we go back out in the field and shoot a second. I don't know where I really stand on that. If I saw some numbers, I'd be willing to buy into it if it is a legit. But that doesn't change where I stand on just there's too many opportunities for abuse, and regardless of what the answer is to my previous statement, I mean, it doesn't change where I stand on it.
Yep. Yeah. Should we add our closing thoughts? Do we have any other?
I have closing thoughts.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Go right ahead.
So,
go right ahead. I think we're gonna try to wrap it up here.
Sure. So overall, I mean, I think the states look at the total number of deer taken a year, and they want to create this illusion that things are getting better all the time. Everything's fine and dandy. Everything's great. So what I think we see is, in fact, the numbers aren't great. The quality's not great. And to keep up with those numbers, we constantly have to add ways to be successful, to boost those numbers. So we add more liberal seasons, we add more technology, more opportunity, more implements to use. And I think this is going to go on until we reach a point that no matter how many weapons we add, how many new seasons we add, how many new technologies we add, the herd is too far gone to have a good quality experience. And I mean, that's that. So at least where I stand on it is beliefs and support of a rule change should not be a reflection of a personal hatred that any of us have for a weapon, a technology, or a certain season. I don't personally use a crossbow. I personally think there should be some change with the crossbow. However, that is not based on my personal hatred for the crossbow. Quite frankly, I could see where crossbow hunters might say, well, he's a compound guy. Of course he thinks that way. If the compound bow was devastating the deer herd, I would be the first guy to say, we need to cut back our season, and I'm willing to hang it up if I need to for a longer period of time. I'll just hunt, 3 weeks of the season. If that's what it takes, because I care about the deer herd. That's essentially what it is. So bottom line, I want anything to be managed, whether it's the compound bow, the crossbow, the cell cam, the bait piles, whatever it is. I want it to be managed in a way that improves the quality of the hunt so that everybody that takes part in it can have a good time. That's where I stand.
Yeah. I agree. The gentleman I just spoke about, the story about deer herd management, state to state, how the state issues tags, the whole reason why he put that talk together was because the state he hunts in, which I'm not going to reveal, he's like, I deer hunt there all the time, and there's a rifle season, and that's usually because he travels all over the country hunting big whitetails. That's usually where I fill my family's freezer. I shoot a deer for my dad. I shoot a deer for my cousin. I'm tagging all of those deer. They don't have the opportunity to go out and hunt. They don't want to, but they like the meat. And so I'm going to fill my tags with deer that I'm going to be generous and give to those people. And during the 30-day rifle season or whatever it is, I saw one deer on this 40-acre property that I've hunted since I was a kid and have killed hundreds of deer on. How did I go from 10 years ago being able to shoot in a week 3 does or a young buck to fill my family's freezers to now, 10 years later, I can barely even see a deer. How did that happen? And that's how he got to think about those things, because he's forward thinking as well. He's trying to analyze the situation he's got in front of him and say, I don't want this to be the case. I want to be able to go deer hunting and see deer. And I want my kids to do that. And I want their kids to do that. And I want generations from now, when my memory is long forgotten, for that to be the case for hunters. And that's exactly the way we're approaching this argument from the drone side of things, which is it has the potential to be absolutely devastating to deer and therefore absolutely detrimental to the continuation of high-quality deer hunting experiences.
I used to always hear as a kid, people would say, "Oh, we're all on the same team. We're all hunters, guys. Guys, we're all on the same team." As I've gotten older, I've realized that couldn't be further from the truth.
Maybe we used to be.
Maybe. We're not all on the same team anymore. There are people out there that can and will ruin the sport of hunting as you know it. So what I would leave you with is if you believe in something or you feel some type of way about something and you're passionate about it like we all are, I feel blessed to be able to sit at a table with 2 other guys that are very like-minded when it comes to this resource and our passion for pursuing it. Speak out about it. I mean, this isn't something that's necessarily easy to talk about because there's a lot of people out there that'll look at this as complaining. They'll look at this as why do you worry about what other people do? I think it's because we care so much, not about just ourselves, but for the future you talked about, for our kids, for their kids, for other hunters potentially as well. So I would just leave you with, you heard Easton's stance on it. You heard Jake's stance on it. Mine is very, very similar and basically identical to theirs. But if you're passionate about something like this, or maybe you agree with us, speak out about it. It may take eventually a group of guys standing up for this to see some sort of change in the right direction.
And speaking out about it doesn't have to be like this on a long-form podcast. It could be talk about it at the family Thanksgiving table and just get people's opinions and thoughts and get their wheels turning. Because at the end of the day, just like you said, those guys are going to be like, some guys are going to say, why do you care what other people do? It's like, why do you care that we're talking about this? It's the same thing. So that's not a high quality argument. Your point is,
I think I said yesterday, I'll die on this sword. And what I've realized over the last 2 weeks being very outspoken about this is there's a lot of people out there that are, number one, in agreement, but number two, willing to be open and hear a different side of things and change their mind. And we'll be the first to tell you we are willing to do that as well. So if somebody, can present something to us that's, maybe appealing or rational or whatever you want to say, I'm willing to hear it. I'm all ears.
You would have to sell me on how allowing drones would make hunting better in the long term.
Yep.
Because that's what I want is, and we all just talked about it. We want hunting for the long term for our kids, our grandkids, etc. To be good. So if you can convince me how it will contribute to the continuation of quality deer hunting, I'm all in.
Let's hear it.
Yep, I agree.
So that's going to wrap it up. We appreciate you guys listening. I know that was kind of long. If you are in any way, shape, or form interested in communicating back and forth about this topic, shoot us a message, drop a comment, share it with your buddies, whether you agree or disagree. We want to hear it. We've had plenty of people message us too that are, disagree with us and think completely differently than we do. So we're open to it. But yeah, we appreciate you guys listening. We're probably going to have more of these in the future about other topics, maybe some a little more positive or a little more fun. But for the meantime, yeah, we thank you guys. Anything else?
Nope. It's all good. Wrap it
Cool.
up.
All right. We'll see y'all.
It's hard to get
I would just say technical difficulty.
Fired up, yeah.
Part 2.
okay.
I wouldn't even pretend like we had technical difficulties. I'd just run with it.
But it's hard to get fired back up. I was on a rant. So we had some technical difficulties.
Technical, we just ran out of battery twice.
Yeah. So, what I was saying is, is this even...